I never thought the woman who called herself family would end up handing me the exact ammunition I needed to end her. She thought a slap in front of my children was going to put me in my place. She had no idea that slap detonated something she couldn't have possibly imagined. You're not even a real father. You just picked them up off the street. That's what my sister-in-law screamed as she swung her hand and slapped me right across the face, right in front of my children's panicked, tear-filled eyes. She was arrogant, but she had absolutely no idea that slap had just single-handedly torched the invisible ATM that had been paying her mortgage for the past 3 years. The Navy officer instinct in me activated instantly. I didn't panic. I wiped the corner of my mouth, smiled coldly, and stared straight into the eyes of the person who just struck me. "You have exactly 10 seconds, I whispered, a ruthless smile spreading across my face. Before I get into it, take a second to like and subscribe if you actually want to know how this ends, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now." The sharp, burning sting on my left cheek dragged me backward through 3 decades of careful, deliberate humiliation in under a heartbeat. I grew up crushed under the suffocating shadow of my older brother Marcus, the undisputed golden boy of the Cross family. The contrast between us wasn't subtle. It was systemic. It was architectural. Built into every holiday, every birthday, every dinner table conversation my parents ever conducted, like a board meeting I was never given a seat at. When Marcus turned 18, my father threw a backyard party with a live jazz quartet, imported champagne, a 3-tier fondant cake, and a toast that ran 4 minutes long. He called Marcus the future of the family name, the crown jewel, the one who'd carry the Cross legacy into the boardrooms of Manhattan. Then he handed him the keys to a brand new midnight blue BMW with a white ribbon on the hood, and a blank check for Ivy League tuition to study high finance. Every relative in attendance clapped. My mother cried happy tears into a silk handkerchief. 2 years later, on my 18th birthday, I got a drugstore greeting card with a $50 bill tucked inside and a tight-lipped reminder from my mother that dinner was at 6, that I should wear something presentable, and that I shouldn't make a fuss because it was just a Tuesday. No cake. No toast. No keys to anything. I sat at that dining table watching my parents fawn over Marcus's latest internship photos pinned to the refrigerator, and I understood, with the calm, clinical clarity of a man reading his own medical chart, that I would never be enough for these people. Not because I'd failed. Because I was never entered into the competition to begin with. I walked into a sterile military recruiter's office the following Monday morning. Fluorescent light humming over a metal desk buried in pamphlets. A sergeant with calloused hands and a crew cut looked me dead in the eye and asked if I understood what I was signing up for. I told him I did. I signed my name, traded the country club memberships and stiff family dinners for combat boots, 4:30 morning conditioning runs through freezing rain, and highly classified tactical cyber warfare training where the recycled air tasted like cold steel and burnt circuit boards. My parents treated my enlistment like a personal betrayal. My mother told her book club I was going through a rebellious phase and would come to my senses eventually. My father stopped mentioning me at family dinners entirely, like the chair I sat in had simply gone empty. Meanwhile, I was building a spine out of iron discipline in places they couldn't have pointed to on a map, while they stayed busy polishing Marcus's collapsing house of cards, too preoccupied to notice or care. Over the years, I endured my sister-in-law Vanessa's relentless, weaponized snobbery with the calculated patience of a sniper locked in a blind, counting heartbeats. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner with surgical precision. The mahogany table set with my mother's imported china. Candles flickering in silver holders. Vanessa sat directly across from me, clinking her crystal champagne flute against my brother's glass, then turned and cast a long, deliberate, pitying glance at my tailored but unbranded navy blazer. She sighed loud enough for the whole table to hear, dabbed the corner of her glossed lips with a linen napkin, and leaned toward my mother in a manufactured sympathetic whisper. "It must be so devastating," she said, swirling the champagne in her glass, "being stuck on a little government paycheck like that." "Bless his heart," she said it the way you'd talk about a neighbor's sickly dog you wished someone would just put down. I ran 4 deliberate rounds of tactical breathing under the table, boots flat against the hardwood, posture rigid, expression revealing absolutely nothing. I catalogued her words not as a wound, but as intelligence. Evidence I'd file away in a locked drawer inside my skull and retrieve at the exact moment it would do her the most damage. The real collapse happened exactly 3 years before that barbecue slap. A Tuesday night, rain hammering my living room windows so hard the glass rattled in the frames. The doorbell rang at 11:30. I pulled the door open and found the golden boy standing on my porch, stripped completely of every layer of arrogance he'd ever worn. Pale, trembling, sweat soaked clean through his $4,000 Italian suit, darkening the fabric across his chest and under his arms. He'd been fired that afternoon, permanently blacklisted from the entire financial sector for undeniable insider trading violations. His pristine, carefully curated Wall Street reputation reduced to smoking rubble overnight. The bank was already circling his sprawling mansion, drawing up foreclosure paperwork before the body was even cold. He stumbled past me into the living room, collapsed onto my sofa and wept like a terrified child, snot running into his open palms, his Italian leather shoes dripping rainwater onto my hardwood floor. He begged me in a voice cracked and stripped raw not to tell our mother. I didn't help him out of warm sibling love. I didn't do it out of some leftover family obligation. I did it strictly, exclusively, to protect my aging, fragile mother from the cardiac shock of discovering that her golden son, her pride, her life's work, was a disgraced criminal whose face would be splashed across financial news sites by morning. I leveraged my flawless credit, my top-tier security clearance, and the massive covert investment yields I'd been methodically accumulating for 2 decades. I quietly assumed the full, suffocating burden of his exorbitant mortgage. I became the invisible ATM. The only condition I demanded in return was his absolute, permanent silence. I sat in my armchair and watched him wipe his tears, blow his nose into a crumpled tissue, and then watched his face rearrange itself back into its default mask of arrogance in real time, like watching a reptile shed vulnerable skin, the exact second my wire transfer confirmation pinged his phone. He didn't say thank you. Didn't ask how I could afford it. He straightened his tie, ran his fingers through his wet hair, and walked out my front door without looking back, like the last 45 minutes of sobbing on my sofa had never happened. I locked that toxic secret in the darkest vault of my mind and bolted it shut. I just armed the bomb that would eventually destroy him. I simply didn't know the fuse length yet. The cold, piercing blue glow of the Strategic Command Center at U.S. Fleet Cyber Command in Norfolk was more of a home to me than any house my family ever owned. I spent my days surrounded by the low electronic hum of servers processing threat data off 6 continents, carrying the weight of global threat matrices on my shoulders, neutralizing intrusions before most Americans finished their morning coffee. I wasn't the low-level government grunt Vanessa imagined when she practiced her pitying head tilts across the dinner table. I was a senior commanding officer with a high clearance, working in the deep end of national defense, where one wrong call could cascade into an international incident. My official salary was substantial on its own. But the aggressive, meticulously calculated stock and real estate investments I'd been compounding for over 20 years had quietly made me a millionaire several times over, entirely off Vanessa's radar. Every time she leaned across the table, reeking of her suffocating floral perfume, and offered to pay for my coffee with that sympathetic head tilt, the grim irony physically tightened my jaw until my teeth ached. My hidden portfolio was the only thing standing between her and a cardboard box behind a strip mall. I came home every night filling the entire house with a scent that meant safety in a way no security clearance ever could. She'd be at her drafting table in the study when I got home, tracing blueprints with a steady hand, a mug of tea gone cold beside her elbow. She never demanded a debrief on my day. Never flinched at my long silences. She'd just stand up, cross the room, press her forehead gently to mine, and hold me there until my locked shoulders finally dropped. The heavy commander's armor came off in that house. Only in that house. Only with her. My name is Nathan Cross, and the cruelest weapon my family ever wielded against me didn't involve money or status. It lived in the dining room at every single holiday gathering, whispered between sips of wine and bites of turkey. For years, I endured Vanessa leaning into my mother's ear, her voice pitched at that specific volume designed to be overheard, whispering the words barren and failure and what a shame while glancing my direction. My mother would sigh heavily, shake her head with theatrical disappointment, and fix me with those tired, accusatory eyes across the mashed potatoes. The questions came every December without fail, growing sharper each year. When was I going to fulfill my duty as a man and give this family an heir? Whether I'd considered getting checked out, because surely something was wrong with me. I'd grip my water glass under the table until my knuckles went white, absorbing every venomous whisper, every disappointed headshake, every Christmas prayer where my mother publicly asked God to bless our childless marriage without spilling a single drop of wine, without ever raising my voice. The truth was a grenade I'd been holding with the pin pulled for 17 years. I was perfectly healthy. My body wasn't the one carrying the diagnosis. Olivia was the one who'd been told, in a sterile doctor's office with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that a severe uterine condition had made carrying a child physically impossible. I sat beside her on that thin paper covering the exam table, watched her face collapse as the specialist delivered it in a flat clinical monotone, watched her hands go limp in her lap, her jaw lock, her eyes fix on a point on the wall and not blink for what felt like a full minute. I made the most deliberate, tactical decision of my life in that room. I chose to let the family believe the fault was mine. I stepped directly into the firing line to shield her from my family's conservative, cruel judgment. I absorbed every whispered accusation, every disappointed sigh, every prayer circle humiliation for 17 straight years. Because I loved her more than I needed my family's approval, and because some truths are only yours to protect, not to explain to people who'd only use them as another blade. We adopted Grace when she was 4 and Sophia when she was a newborn. The paperwork took 11 agonizing months of forms, interviews, home inspections. The love took 11 seconds. I held Sophia for the first time in a cold government office that smelled like floor polish and old paper, and her tiny fist closed around my finger with a grip that anchored me to the floor. The war that had been running in my chest since I was 18 went quiet, for the first time in my adult life. Olivia stood behind me, her hand warm on my shoulder, tears sliding silently down both cheeks, her architect's hands trembling. We built our fortress from that moment, brick by brick, on a foundation of truth, sacrifice, and a loyalty fierce enough to burn down anything that threatened it. My mother's annual 4th of July barbecue landed on a Saturday that year. The house sprawled across 2 acres of manicured lawn, bordered by white picket fencing and flags snapping on tall poles in the thick summer air. I swept the property the second we came through the side gate, the tactical read happening automatically before my conscious mind had caught up. Excessive catering. A full roasted pig on a spit. 3 dessert tables. A hired bartender behind a rented mahogany bar. The laughter drifting across the lawn was hollow, performed, the kind of noise people make when they care more about being seen than being happy. I clocked the exits, the blind spots behind the pool house, the cluster of lawn chairs by the grill where Marcus held court, craft beer sweating in his hand, Vanessa draped decoratively on his arm in a new designer sundress that cost more than some families' monthly rent. I retreated to the shaded stone patio and was quickly flanked by 3 off-duty officers I'd invited, forming a loose, comfortable perimeter discussing deployment schedules in calm, measured tones. Their presence was a vital buffer against my family's probing and the passive-aggressive remarks drifting across the lawn like second-hand smoke. Surrounded by people who'd earned my trust through fire and discipline instead of the accident of shared blood, I let myself take one real breath. From the patio, I watched Marcus by the grill, wearing the tight, panicked smile of a man who knew his entire existence was a fraud financed by the brother he openly ignored. He caught my eye once across the lawn, held it 2 seconds, looked away, and took a long pull from his bottle. I sipped my water and felt cold disgust coat the back of my throat. My situational awareness spiked before my conscious mind registered why. I cut off mid-sentence, eyes locking onto a disturbance near the pool. The chatter collapsed into a dull roar in my ears. I spotted my youngest, Sophia, breaking away from a cluster of older kids near the deep end, small shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands, running blind, stumbling on the wet concrete straight toward me. I set my glass down with a sharp clink. Every muscle went taut. Father mode deactivated. Commander came online. Sophia crashed into my legs hard enough to knock me back a step, burying her tear-soaked face in my jeans, her whole body trembling. I dropped into a crouch, ignoring her spilled drink shattering across the concrete, and wrapped her in an impenetrable cage of my arms. Her chest heaved with gasps so raw they sounded like a child drowning on dry land. Breathe. Slow. Count to 4. Report. Tell me what happened. The 3 officers behind me stepped back without a word, recognizing something they'd seen dozens of times downrange, a commanding officer assessing a casualty. The barbecue noise seemed to evaporate. Nothing existed except the bubble of focus I'd built around my daughter and the broken sound of her breathing fighting the sobs locked in her chest. She tilted her face up. Her eyes were shattered in a way that didn't belong on any 10-year-old. Tears had carved wet tracks down both cheeks, her bottom lip quivering so hard her teeth chattered. She fought the words out past the knot in her throat. Tyler said he said grace and I are just charity throwaways. That we don't share this family's blood. That you only picked us up because you can't have kids. That you're not a normal man. The words hit like shrapnel tearing through Kevlar, ripping through tissue I genuinely believed was armored past reach. The realization detonated like an IED in my chest. Vanessa and Marcus's manufactured venom hadn't stayed contained at the dinner table. It had crawled down into the next generation, infected a 14-year-old's mouth, and used it to tear the heart out of my 10-year-old daughter beside a swimming pool on the 4th of July. A freezing, lethal calm flooded my bloodstream, overriding the grief, replacing it with something far more dangerous. My whole psychological framework shifted from defense to total execution mode in under 2 seconds. I rose to my full height, vertebra by vertebra, until I stood rigid. My face hardened into an unrecognizable mask of stone. I pushed Sophia gently but firmly behind me into Olivia's arms as she arrived at a dead sprint, face white, eyes already blazing. I didn't shout. Didn't rush. I executed a slow, deliberate, terrifyingly precise march across the sun-baked patio toward the pool, where my 14-year-old nephew Tyler stood smirking beside his two older brothers, Jason and Ryan. Every step I took seemed to drain the air pressure from the yard. Conversations died mid-word. My eyes locked onto the boy like a targeting system acquiring a hostile signature, stripping away the inherited smirk his parents had taught him, replacing it with paralyzing dread before I'd even opened my mouth. His older brothers stepped sideways, abandoning him with the instinctive cowardice of their father's bloodline. I stopped inches from him, invading his space with an authority that made him flinch backward hard enough to nearly lose his footing on the wet deck. I projected my voice low, steady, precisely targeted, slicing through the party noise like a blade through paper. Tyler, look me in the eye. Answer me. Grace and Sophia are my daughters, bearing the cross name. They are part of this family, permanently recognized by law and by love. From this second forward, if I ever hear another word out of your mouth aimed at your sisters, you will regret it more than you can imagine right now. Do you understand me? The boy went ash white, every drop of blood draining from his face. His lips trembled. He nodded once, then again, frantically, unable to produce a syllable, eyes glistening with tears he was fighting to suppress. Before I could step back, a crystal wine glass exploded against the patio stones behind me. Vanessa was charging across the grass barefoot, designer sandals abandoned somewhere behind her, her face contorted into a snarl that obliterated every trace of the polished mask she'd spent a decade gluing into place. She stormed into my space, close enough that I could smell champagne on her breath and the cloying sweetness of her perfume, kicking aside broken glass without looking down, ignoring the dozens of stunned guests staring from every corner of the yard. She jabbed a trembling manicured finger into my chest. "What the hell are you doing to my son? Stay away from him, you bastard." Her voice was a piercing shriek that bounced off the back of the house. Every person at the party was watching now. The stage, she demanded, was hers. Before I could shift into even a basic defensive stance, she swung her right arm with the full, reckless torque of her body behind it. The slap connected with a loud, sickening crack across my jaw, snapping my head sideways hard enough to blur my vision for half a second. The entire backyard froze into a suffocating silence, so total it felt like the air itself had stopped. Someone near the bar killed the music. The only sound left was the low mechanical hum of the pool filter. Vanessa didn't pause. She followed the assault immediately with a barrage of pure psychological poison, each word designed for maximum damage in front of the biggest possible audience. "Who do you think you are to discipline my son? You're just a pathetic, sterile man who had to pick up some bastard orphans to cover up your own failure. You're jealous of my family, jealous of my biological children who carry the real cross blood." From the edge of my vision, Olivia lunged forward like a wall of restrained fury, her eyes blazing with a singular intent to physically remove Vanessa from my proximity. I raised a single rigid hand without turning my head. She stopped dead as if she'd hit a concrete wall. My silent command overrode her rage with the finality of a steel cable snapping taut. One of the officers behind me had instinctively reached for his belt before catching himself. Another already had his phone half out. I lowered my hand slowly, reached up, and wiped a drop of blood from the split corner of my lip with my thumb. I looked at the red smear, tasted copper on my tongue. I didn't flinch. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't step back. I looked Vanessa dead in her wide, frantic eyes and let a terrifying, dead-eyed smile spread slowly across my bleeding face. You have exactly 10 seconds to get off this property before I call the military police and local law enforcement to drag you away in handcuffs for assaulting an active-duty officer. My voice was barely above a whisper, carrying the crushing, immovable weight of an absolute guarantee backed by federal law and 23 years of service. Vanessa's wild, triumphant expression flickered. The arrogance cracked for exactly 1 second, and behind it I saw something small and terrified peek out before she blinked it away. Marcus scrambled out of the paralyzed crowd, face drained of color, sweat running down both temples, his whole body radiating the sour stench of fear. He stepped in front of his wife with both palms raised, launching into the most pathetic, transparently desperate gaslighting performance I'd witnessed in my entire career studying psychological manipulation. "Come on, Nathan. You're overreacting. Calm down. She's just a father protecting his kid. Wait, you're the one who came over here and started this. Don't blow it out of proportion. Let it go. We're family." I looked at my brother, the man whose mortgage I'd silently paid for 3 years. The disgraced fraud whose children attended elite private schools on my money. The coward who'd sobbed on my sofa and begged for my help, now standing in front of the woman who'd just physically assaulted me and called my daughters bastard orphans, asking me to let it go because we're family. I felt my split lip curl with disgust so pure it tasted like battery acid, dissolving the last thread of whatever connection I'd ever felt toward him. Overreacting, Marcus. Fine. Enjoy the last few days of peace you've got left. I held his stare long enough to watch sweat bead and run down his neck into his collar. Then I gave Olivia a sharp nod. We evacuated the perimeter in a tight formation, Grace and Sophia shielded between our bodies, leaving the shattered, whispering ruins of that barbecue behind us like a house fire I'd never waste a drop of water trying to put out. I never expected the people who shared my blood to be the ones holding the knife to my back. If you've ever had to cut ties with a toxic family to protect your peace, hit that like button right now. Share your story in the comments, because silence only protects the people doing the damage. The long drive home was swallowed by a silence so thick it pressed against the tinted windows like deep-sea pressure. In the mirror, my girls huddled together in the back seat, Grace's arm locked protectively around Sophia's trembling shoulders, both faces hollow from watching people who were supposed to be family explode in broad daylight. Olivia gripped the wheel until her knuckles glowed white under the dashboard lights, a muscle ticking rhythmically in her jaw. We stopped at a red light on an empty road, neon bleeding red across the rain-spattered windshield. She didn't look at me. "I'm sorry, Nathan," she finally said, voice thick and loaded with guilt. "I should have thrown her off you. I shouldn't have let you stop me." I reached across the console and squeezed her shoulder, hard, transmitting resolve through the grip. "It's not your fault. This is my war with my own rotten family, and it's time for it to end. Completely." We got home. I moved through the house executing a shutdown sequence with mechanical precision, front door locked, patio secured, alarm armed. I carried the girls upstairs in silence. Grace went to her room without a word, jaw set, a dangerous quiet fury behind her eyes that reminded me of my own reflection at 13. I knelt beside Sophia's bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, kissed her forehead, held her hand until her breathing evened into sleep. Then I went down the hall into the home office and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. I powered up the encrypted terminal. Cold blue light cut across my face in the dark room. My fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation, straight into the banking portals controlling the automated transfers I'd built 3 years ago to keep my brother's life from imploding. The numbers glowed green on the left monitor. $6,500 a month rooted to cover the mortgage on his fraudulently obtained mansion. $3,000 for his eldest's tuition at an elite prep school. $2,000 into a recurring account funding Vanessa's spa appointments, hair treatments, and designer handbags. Every dollar on that screen had been bled from me through deployments, 16-hour shifts, and calculated risks that kept me staring at stock tickers at 3 in the morning. All of it siphoned off by ungrateful parasites who'd repaid it by striking me in public and teaching their kids to call my daughters throwaways. I didn't hesitate. Click. The mortgage transfer deleted. Click. The tuition mandate wiped. Click. The luxury stipend terminated, every credit line frozen, every routing number connected to Marcus's name hard blocked. I closed the laptop. Total darkness swallowed the room like clean silence. The financial execution was complete. Weeks passed in blissful quiet for our household. Grace filled a sketchbook with charcoal castles and armored figures, pressing the pencil hard enough to leave grooves. Sophia laughed at breakfast for the first time since the barbecue, knocking over her cereal bowl. Olivia buried herself in blueprints spread across the dining table every night, her hands steady, our home anchored in stability that felt earned. Across town, on a timer they didn't know was ticking, the bombs I'd planted began to detonate. The bank's foreclosure notices arrived by certified mail. The prep school threatened immediate expulsion over unpaid tuition. And the final humiliation landed publicly. Vanessa standing at the marble counter of the spa she'd visited weekly for 3 years, sliding her card across, watching it decline. A second card. Declined. A third. The receptionist practiced sympathetic look said everything. Vanessa snatched her cards, stuffed them in her purse and walked out without a word. Despite the collapse consuming their lives, Vanessa was still too arrogant to call me directly. In her mind, I was still the dry, sterile government grunt who'd married the real provider, Olivia, the architect. She aimed her panic straight at my wife, fundamentally misjudging where the real power in our marriage lived. Olivia's phone buzzed constantly, voicemails piling into a tower of hysterical sobbing, texts oscillating between manipulation and raw screaming rage. Olivia, why did you cut the money? The bank is foreclosing. You can't be this cruel. Please don't listen to your crazy husband. Olivia held the screen up for me to read every night at dinner, shaking her head in disgust. I told her to keep ignoring it. Let the silence eat her alive. Sheer desperation finally forced Vanessa's hand on a rainy Wednesday, 3 weeks later. She ambushed Olivia at the quiet cafe near her firm, sliding into the chair across from her without a greeting, unrecognizable, haggard mascara smeared, hair unwashed, the cornered look of someone who just felt the trap close on both legs. She launched into a weeping, aggressively victimized monologue loud enough to draw stares from every patron in the cafe. Nathan, you're too cruel. How can you push your brother's family out into the street over some petty squabble between women? A moment of anger, and you let that crazy wife of yours talk you into cutting everything off. You're the provider, the reasonable one. Why are you letting Olivia manipulate you like this? This family needs you. Olivia sat perfectly still through the whole performance. She didn't interrupt, didn't shift in her seat. She let Vanessa run out of words entirely, left sitting there chest heaving, mascara dripping onto the white tablecloth, waiting for the reasonable provider to open her wallet and make the nightmare disappear. Olivia set her espresso cup down carefully on its saucer. The ceramic clinked softly against the tense silence. She leaned across the narrow table, her eyes locking onto Vanessa's with a contempt so cold and controlled it stopped the sobbing mid-breath, like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed the air out of her lungs. Vanessa, shut your mouth and listen carefully. First, you need to know the truth about that money. The money that kept you acting so superior all these years, every dollar that saved your family, that kept your fake little empire from crumbling for 3 years, none of it was mine. It's Nathan's salary. Money from his military career, from his blood, sweat, and smart investing. The very man you've spent a decade calling a poor, sterile grunt has been single-handedly paying the mortgage on the house you live in and the clothes on your back. Vanessa's face went completely slack. Her jaw dropped. Her fingers released the crumpled napkin she'd been strangling, and it fell into her lap. Her lips moved soundlessly for several seconds, her whole worldview cracking down the center like a windshield struck by a rock at highway speed. No, that's impossible. He's just a lowly grunt. Olivia didn't blink. She leaned another inch closer and twisted the knife deeper. Second, you've spent years degrading Nathan as some useless, sterile man. The truth is, I'm the one who was diagnosed. A uterine condition. The reason we couldn't have biological children is me. Nathan is perfectly healthy. But he chose to take that stigma onto himself, absorb every scornful look, every bit of your family's humiliation, just to protect my dignity from conservative, cruel, uneducated people like you. He carried that for 17 years because he actually loves me. And you only ever loved your own hollow status. She straightened up, pulled a crisp $100 bill from her jacket pocket, and dropped it flat on the tablecloth beside her untouched espresso. She stood, buttoned her jacket with calm precision, and walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving Vanessa alone at the table, mouth still hanging open, mascara streaking her cheeks under the pendant lights, watching every pillar of her constructed reality collapse into rubble while a cafe full of strangers stared and said nothing. Operating from the security of my command post, I mobilized Grace Morgan, my attorney. A former JAG officer with the professional warmth of a scalpel and the negotiation style of a guided missile. We coordinated a two-pronged strike with the precision of a military operation. First, Grace secured ironclad sworn affidavits from my Navy colleagues who'd witnessed every second of the barbecue assault. Armed with testimony from decorated federal officers, she filed immediate criminal charges against Vanessa for assaulting an active-duty service member. An emergency restraining order came through within 48 hours, non-negotiable, building an invisible wall of federal protection around my family that Vanessa couldn't cross without facing immediate arrest. Second, I personally delivered the meticulously compiled dossier of Marcus's falsified income statements, the exact fraudulent documents he'd used to secure that massive mortgage, directly into the hands of the bank's internal risk management and compliance division. The corporate response was swift and merciless. Faced with documented evidence of large-scale fraud from a broker already blacklisted for insider trading, the bank froze every one of Marcus's remaining accounts within 72 hours. The foreclosure accelerated past every standard grace period. Field agents arrived to formally seal the property. The mansion, the manicured lawns, the three-car garage full of leased luxury vehicles, all of it wrapped in yellow tape and legal notices like a crime scene. Marcus was drowning in legal summons, criminal court dates, and eviction notices arriving by certified mail with the mechanical regularity of a metronome, counting down what remained of a life built entirely on borrowed time and stolen credit. Completely broken, bankrupt, and buried in legal jeopardy, my brother made one last desperate play. He called me directly for the first time in months, voice cracked and unrecognizable, begging for dinner, a sit-down, a chance to apologize in person and negotiate a truce. He promised tearful remorse. He promised Vanessa would kneel in front of my daughters and beg forgiveness. He invoked our mother's name 3 times in 90 seconds, wielding it like a shield made of tissue paper. I accepted not to reconcile. To witness the end. The restaurant was dim and upscale, tucked into a quiet corner of the financial district, a private dining room in back dark wood paneling, a single overhead lamp casting a cone of amber light over the glass table. Olivia and I arrived together and took our seats across from the smoldering wreckage of my family. Vanessa sat hunched beside Marcus, unrecognizable from the champagne-swirling socialite who'd slapped me across the face 8 weeks earlier. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer clothes. Her face was hollow, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, hands clasped tight in her lap like she was physically holding herself together. Every ounce of arrogant venom had drained out of her, leaving a brittle, ghostly shell that flinched when the waiter set down a glass of water. Marcus started weeping before the appetizers even arrived. He pressed a napkin to his face, voice cracking as he reached across the table. "Nathan, please. We're family. Blood is the strongest bond there is," he sobbed into his collar. "You have to give us a second chance. I'll make Vanessa kneel right here in front of your daughters and beg their forgiveness personally. Think of Mom, Nathan. This will break her heart. It'll kill her to see this family torn apart. Please just call off the lawyers." I sat back against the leather booth, arms crossed, watching his mouth move, hearing the words land on the table between us like dead leaves. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not grief, not love. Total clinical detachment, the kind of detachment a surgeon feels looking at an X-ray of a bone he's already decided to cut. I let him finish. I let the exhausted silence stretch until it turned physically uncomfortable, until Vanessa shifted in her seat and Marcus's wet, desperate eyes darted between my face and Olivia's, hunting for any crack he could exploit. Then I moved, slow and methodical, the way you move through something you've rehearsed 1,000 times in your head. I reached down beside my chair, unbuckled my briefcase, and pulled out 2 thick stacks of legal documents. I held them at the height of the table for 1 suspended second, then slammed them down onto the glass. The sound cracked through the private room like a gavel. There's no reconciliation here. You chose this outcome the day Vanessa raised her hand and called my kids throwaways. I spent 17 years of my life and my money tolerating tumors dressed up as relatives, trying to protect this rotten, fake family. My limit's been reached. My patience is gone. This dinner isn't a negotiation table. It's so I can watch with my own eyes that you get exactly what's coming to you. From the second we walk out that door, there's no bloodline, no family between us. You'll pay for every lie, every cruel word. Good luck in court. You're going to need it. Olivia and I stood in unison. She put her hand on the small of my back. I didn't look down at my brother's collapsing face. Didn't look at Vanessa's hollow shell. I picked up my briefcase, squared my shoulders, and walked through the private room, through the restaurant, out into the cool night air. I took 1 full breath. The air tasted clean. The sky was clear. I didn't look back. Not once. Several months passed. The new order I'd built for my household settled into place with the quiet permanence of concrete curing around rebar. The bank formally evicted Marcus and Vanessa, seizing every remaining asset tied to his name. They relocated to a cramped apartment on the industrial edge of the city, the kind of place with flickering hallway lights and walls thin enough to hear arguments 3 doors down. The restraining order held unchallenged. They existed now only as distant ghosts on the far side of a legal wall I'd built with my own hands and my own money. Jason and Ryan, the older nephews who'd grown up riding in leased luxury sedans and attending schools with Latin on the crest, dropped out of college within weeks of each other, spending their nights washing dishes and bussing tables at roadside diners just to cover rent. The glittering fake empire of the Cross family was nothing but dust scattered in the wind, carried off by the same currents that had once inflated it. In the middle of the wreckage, a single unexpected piece of mail arrived at our gate. I noticed it in the stack of bills and flyers, a plain white envelope, no return address, my name written on the front in careful, uneven handwriting. I opened it standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall. Inside were 2 pages of notebook paper in a 14-year-old's careful script. Tyler had written it to Grace and Sophia. Not to me. He apologized with a rawness, a broken, confessional honesty I genuinely hadn't believed he was capable of. He admitted, word by aching word, that he'd been poisoned by his parents' hatred, that he'd repeated their words without understanding what damage they could do, that he'd heard his mother say those exact phrases about my daughters at the dinner table dozens of times, and absorbed them like a sponge soaking up dirty water without knowing better. He wrote that he was ashamed, that he wanted to be different, that he was going to forge his own path, as far from their delusions as his legs could carry him. I read it standing perfectly still in the hallway. When I finished the second page, I slid it gently back into the envelope and felt a real, unguarded smile pull at the corners of my mouth for the first time in months. The cycle had broken in at least one of them. One was enough. A quiet evening in deep winter settled over our house. The kind of stillness that only comes when snow blankets every surface, every rooftop, every bare branch, dampening the world into a soft, cottony silence. The stone fireplace crackled in the living room, casting warm gold light across the oak floors and the rug where Grace lay stretched out on her stomach, absorbed in a charcoal sketch of a medieval knight. Olivia sat in her armchair by the window, reading, occasionally glancing up to meet my eyes with a steady gaze full of quiet, enduring gratitude. Sophia climbed onto the sofa beside me, clutching a velvet throw pillow, tucking her head under my chin, her hair smelling like strawberry shampoo. She settled against me with the total trust of a kid who's never once had a reason to wonder if the arms holding her would let go. She watched the fire for a long time. Then she looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, what does family really mean? Is it only the people who gave birth to you, who share your blood, that make a family?" I wrapped both arms around her, pressed a slow kiss to her forehead. I looked across the room at Olivia, whose eyes glistened in the firelight. I looked down at Grace, who'd stopped sketching and was watching me, chin on her folded arms, waiting. I took a breath that filled my chest completely, for what felt like the first time in 27 years. Real family isn't about blood or DNA, sweetheart. Real family is the people willing to stand and fight for you no matter the cost, to protect each other, to love without conditions, and to never let anyone trample on each other's dignity. And I will always be here, the one standing between our family and every storm that comes. Sophia smiled, a bright glowing smile that lit up her whole face. She closed her eyes and nestled deeper into my arms, drifting off to sleep, completely safe in the arms of a father who'd finally won his most important war. Sometimes justice isn't decided in a courtroom. It's decided by the choices we make. This was cold verdict. Because every story has a verdict.